Hi, and welcome to the Blurry Turtle Podcast. Today's podcast sponsor is envelopes. What's inside? Envelopes. So going into the quarterfinals here with Felix and Alex de Minaur, I think they both deserve to be here. They both played really solid. Felix obviously has pulled the much bigger wins. Going into this matchup, I pretty much always would be looking for the reasons that Felix is going to falter in big moments against Alex. I feel like Alex has put a little bit more focus into the mental side of the game. He's really maxed out everything he can do. Hits the ball very flat, but, uses his speed, plays very consistent, minimizes errors, and he's a bit more tenacious than most players. So against a player like Felix, who's known for, getting a bit too excited on his forehand sometimes, going too big, kind of heat checking himself, getting frustrated in matches, losing his timing a bit on the backhand, especially on returns, it starts to spell Alex winning no matter what. So I spent some time looking through that, kind of trying to make a case for it. At this point in the tournament, everyone's playing really well. The upsets are all kind of possible, in most of these matches. But I couldn't really find a compelling argument to say that Felix can't win this. And I started to flip as I dug into things here. So Felix has better wins, right? Rublev is better than anybody Alex has really played. Alexander Zverev was playing pretty solid tennis against Felix. Felix locked into a really good level halfway through the second set against Zverev and maintained it against Rublev. Never really dropped his level there, which is the thing that'll cost you against Alex. Alex is going to make you play a bunch of tennis. And if you don't have rally tolerance, if you're not able to land first serves, you're going to be in trouble. So second thing I looked at was, just the first serve percentage. 66% is good enough. Above 60 is acceptable for, I think, the men's tour. Once you get into the 70s, the mid 70s, you start to really be playing at your best. I think Felix is playing at his best. 13-4, aces to double faults is solid. The 83% first serves won is something I think is significant. Alex is quicker than Rublev, but when Felix lands his first serve, it's really hard to deal with him. That's why some of his first big results on tour were on grass. He just was able to, serve bot his way through things, even though he wasn't totally complete yet. Pretty clutch on break points saved, but overall, I just think that the level he's playing at and his particular style of tennis could be tricky for Alex. The thing that's stuck in my mind, which is tricky, is the Sinner match against de Minaur. It just looked like Alex could never hit his way out of a rally. He hits the ball very flat, slides a little here on these courts, but not enough to really cause errors for players, at the top of their game. So, it's important to put an asterisk there because Sinner is so much better than Felix in terms of, rally tolerance and really every facet of his game. But it's still, it showed me an issue with Alex's game that explains why he hasn't really made that jump for these big titles. Why he isn't able to beat, a Djokovic, even though he's able to make the rallies look very competitive. It's just hard for him to score. And I think because he doesn't have a really good first serve, all these matchups are about him having to play every single big point well. And that's really tough to do. Maybe early in your career you can. And it's not that it's not that he's not in shape. It's not that, he doesn't want to. It's just hard to maintain that level of, tenacity for a long career. Eventually you're going to get a little unlucky, and it happens. You see players like Nori, RBA, these guys that really grind and play every point with efficiency. You see sometimes they just go through stretches where they just can't generate it, or things go, a little unlucky, and that costs them the matches because they're always playing close matches. So tricky spot for Alex. Also, Alex is kind of known as a gatekeeper. So, going to beat all the guys he's better than and going to kind of lose to the guys that he's worse than. Now, Felix has kind of entered in between those two realms because he is the guy who traditionally would make the unforced errors, that would cost him against Alex. But, not this week. So, Alex hasn't really played anybody who's too threatening, which is great. He'll be fresh for this. I don't think it'll ever be easy. Felix is not as consistent as Sinner. He's not just going to put Alex away. This is going to take a lot of work and a lot of focus from Felix. I think he has to keep his first serve percentage, between 60 and 65 at worst, to be even in this match. But I think he will be. The way he hits the ball on his forehand and the level of consistency that he's kind of shown on the backhand this week, give him a good chance in baseline rallies to earn, a few errors. Alex has a pretty short, compact backhand. It can clip the net sometimes. He's not going to make forehand errors. It's going to be hard for him to score, though, and Felix moves fairly well. So, overall, I think Felix has just a few more ways to score, and for him, it's just going to be about focusing, not getting too impatient, not getting excited if he has the lead, and, not getting discouraged if he's down, because Alex is a really good front runner, so you don't want to give him too much belief. This is kind of the point where I got, if you're watching the video, not just listening. So looking at the head-to-head matches, there's a win for Alex, 2 wins for Felix, a win for Alex, a win for Felix. It seems like they've gone back and forth, but if I edit that to just show hard court matches, Felix has won both. Now, one in 2017, you can throw that out the window. One in 2022, not a great data point, but I would say that Felix wasn't really at his best, the past few seasons. So tossing that out, is both fair and also I'm a bit surprised that he was able to beat Alex back then. So overall, I think the difference here is just that Felix is hitting the ball bigger. I think he will be able to, get some crowd support by playing a slightly more offensive style of tennis. The crowd is going to get behind Alex when he makes great gets. Obviously, Australia against Canada, the New York crowd is just going to be excited for good tennis. They have good energy when that's the situation. I was at qualifiers and it felt like the matches without an American in them or a Japanese player were very quiet. But overall, the atmosphere is way better during the actual tournament, especially in the later rounds when there's more people in the stands. Tickets still seem available. A lot of the stadiums I saw yesterday had tons of empty seats, but that's a pricing issue for them. They're charging way too much for tickets that aren't that great. Sitting at the top of the stadium is a nice experience once, but you kind of have a better time watching at home most of the time. So, only the bottom half of the section, tends to fill up in these stadiums. But nobody cares about that. And I don't even know if I'm right. I'm just talking. And that's the good thing about podcasts. I talk and no one gets to argue. So I might be right or I might be wrong. You could be cursing about me right now at home and I never, ever have to hear it. But if you put it in the comments, I'll feel bad and have imaginary arguments with you all day in my head while I walk around. Thank you. So, yeah, I sort of think Felix can win this. This is the big, giant test for him. Rublev hits the ball huge. Doesn't really move anywhere near as well as Alex. Zverev hits the ball huge, but backed off his game a bunch against Felix. And, Felix has decent success against servers because he has a big serve as well. And he's a little bit more capable generally in the rallies than the other servers because he has that forehand weapon. Alex Zverev has that backhand, but if he's not hitting it down the line, his backhand is the same as Medvedev's backhand, really. There's no difference. He hits it harder, sure. But does he hit it hard when he's in pressure situations? Does he hug the baseline? No, he doesn't do these things, and it gives Felix a chance to play. And if you watch that match, you saw Zverev make a ton of forehand errors every time Felix went inside in. That's a ball, Alex had trouble with against Sinner. When they were trading forehands cross court, when Alex was trying to create that wide angle cross court, it was hard for him to hit winners. I don't know if he'll go as aggressively here. I feel like when you're playing Felix, even though he's in very good form, you'll take at least a set to kind of test whether that form will remain. This is a big moment for Felix. He hasn't made a ton of quarterfinals. I don't think he's had one in the last 3 years. And Alex has made 5 of the last 7 quarterfinals he's played. So a lot of experience. That quarterfinal record starts to get a little troubling when players get there a lot and don't get through. Rublev had that for a while. Kachanov kind of broke his curse there a bit. Sometimes the experience helps. This should be really close. I definitely want to tune in and watch the whole thing. I feel like the rallies will be excellent. I just think Felix, in the end, hits the ball a little bit bigger. And having beaten Alex twice before on hard court, I imagine that there's something there, something that allows him, just to hit the ball bigger and to score easier. So if Alex plays a perfect match, he can win in 5, but I think Felix wins this in 4 sets. Sinner Musetti, nice to have an easy one. The analysis here is pretty simple after watching the Bublik match. Bublik's leg looked a bit rough. I don't know if he would have played out the whole match if it wasn't a major, and the crowd was there and everything. He did also kind of make one choice and stuck with it for the rest of the match. He decided to hit the ball harder because hitting the ball hard wasn't working, and that just led to a ton of errors. He made things pretty simple on Sinner. At the same time, though, when he put the ball in the court and it was short, Sinner put the ball away with shots that look low percentage. The way he's able to hit his forehand cross court and create short angles for winners doesn't make sense to me. He's just hitting, the net clearance is crazy. The angles he's creating are incredible. He's just getting a ton of RPMs on his forehand. And he has, let's call it the best backhand in the game right now. I think he's kind of passed Djokovic by just by virtue of Djokovic not really being as active in the final matches of tournaments. I think Sinner's backhand is a little bit more reliable and dangerous. Just more match play, really. I think it makes you a little sharper. So, after watching that round, it's tricky because Bublik was clearly hampered, not at 100%, but Sinner goes back to being, before I thought maybe even with Alcaraz for the title here. After watching the Lehechka match and the Sinner match, I think Sinner goes back to being a small but decent favorite there. Alcaraz winning here, I think, given those two levels, would be a really huge result. It's a result I'm fine with. Anything that happens here is going to add to the lore and the intrigue. I think these two being at the top of the game is, it's not saving tennis right now, but it's a giant benefit. It's really great to have two players who are bringing it every time, and to have these additional storylines. The more you follow the tour, the more you get into the little storylines and who's injured and who wants to beat who and all this stuff. And I don't know, I guess I'm happy with it. That's what I'm saying. And I'm trying to be positive, and I'm doing it, and I'll get my reward soon or something. Because that's why you be positive, right? For rewards? That's why you do anything. Give me stuff. So anyway, Musetti has had a little trouble in this matchup. He can play, it's an exhibition match almost, in the sense that the tennis is really, really high quality, but Musetti isn't quite able to win. So at times, he's done this against Alcaraz. He's kind of reverted into, playing for the crowd, which, again, a wildly entertaining player, and it's great when players want to entertain. I'm not trying to knock his game either. I'm not saying he checks out emotionally. I just think realistically there aren't enough ways for him to score on Sinner here. And Sinner's game, his usual game, is kind of optimized on hard court to score points. He's looking to end rallies. It's without risk at this point, and just a tough spot for Musetti. He was solid against Munar. Beating him in straight sets is good. He's only dropped the one set against Pericard, which is not, a huge issue at all. Should be good, but, Sinner won the last two matchups here. Clay, he's expected kind of to win that. You'd think Musetti might be a little closer. 2021 is a bit far back. They played in hard court. 7-5, 6-2 is not bad. You can just expect Sinner to win at this point. I can chat about it for a while, but the guy is really ironing out any issues with his game. If you take a look at a guy who won Wimbledon, won the last two Australian Opens, and is one of the best servers on tour, and then you tell me that he's working on his serve technique to iron some things out, it's pretty impressive, and that is a good sign too. When players are at the top of the game and they don't get complacent and they're still working on things, that's good for the spectators. That's something I think Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic, and Murray, I'm not going to list every player, but I think that the players at the top who really work on every facet of their game are more entertaining to watch for the fans, because tennis is a beautiful game when it's played with variety and style. So more positivity, more rewards, pretty good. I think Musetti's backhand, needs a little bit too much time because he has the one-hander. So I think he'll get a bit rushed in this match. I think that means he's going to have to slice the ball a lot on his backhand or do a lot of running. If he does a lot of running, I think giving up that court position is going to let Sinner take the ball down the line to his forehand well. Musetti can generate good depth from there, but it's a difficult spot because Sinner's not really forcing anything. If he takes the ball to the open court and you hit the ball back. He's able to take the ball down the other wing carefully and without risk on both wings. And then very solid at net at this point too. I think, you saw a team, not Muzzetti's not listening to this for coaching, but you saw a team really go to the slice constantly when he had that good run on hard court, just slicing, making that a clear choice. And he was able to keep it low. And then when players finally forced the issue, he would take his backhand down the line. Muzzetti tends to drive his backhand more often, but I don't know if it's good in this matchup. It almost might be better for him to just accept, not make the slice a second choice, but to just lead with it and kind of see if Sinner will have a little struggle with that. Like Fritz said about Alcaraz, though, these things don't work very long. You get a few points out of it maybe, and then the guy adjusts, and now you've warmed up something that doesn't work anymore. And if you go away from it completely, then you kind of become predictable. So overall, it's just a point where if you want to beat Sinner, you have to play a very solid game of tennis throughout, and then you have to get a bit lucky. We've seen Djokovic play him twice recently and play really, really solid, but no luck at the end. No net cord, no couple aces when he needs them. So, you lose those matches in straight sets, and you leave. The fans are appreciative because you've just played 2-3 hours of tremendous tennis, but for your hope of winning, it's tricky. So I don't think Muzzetti has the level here. I like Sinner to win in 3. 4 would maybe be a surprise. It'll be longer rallies clearly than Bublik. So maybe Sinner will have a set where he goes a bit too aggressive early and gives up a break. But I feel like he can get that back also. I've talked about Muzzetti's serve being really good for a defensive baseliner and a counterpuncher, but it's not good enough to really score on Sinner. Anisimova, Swiatek, another tremendous result for Anisimova. She's really backing up the early hype around, that surrounded her career. I rambled about that earlier in the week. I don't think I really finished my thought. I just think it's great for her to be back playing well and to be enjoying tennis again. I think a lot of the pro players, through different reasons and different paths, they wind up on tour and they're grinding and they're playing hard and it's the life they wanted to live, but I don't think they're totally living it. I think sometimes it just goes by in a blur, and there are so many concerns and practices and schedules and traveling and all this stuff, and they kind of start to not enjoy the tennis, and that's when the results can suffer. So it looks like Anisimova is having fun out there. She's very free about her shot selection. She took some backhands down the line in the last match that were tremendous, and I didn't expect them against Haddad Maia. Yeah, she had the lead, but it's good to see players feeling free enough to hit the shots, because some players don't. Some players kind of go with the more generic choices no matter what, and they feel like if they miss, they don't want to look at their box and things like that. So she's in a good place. She's playing great. Crushed Haddad Maia. I think, in hindsight, the run of Beatrice was tricky to analyze because she starts to win matches, but she's been in a slump for a while. So what started to happen was she'd win a match during that slump in good form and then play a rough one the next one. Here, I don't think she played that rough. If you take a look at the stats, she served 68% for her serves in. And Anisimova just had the offense, just hits too many winners. And, the points that Haddad Maia got against Zachary from just unforced errors, they're just not really there against Anisimova. She wants to be in a baseline rally. And if you give her time to swing, that's what she wants. So really nothing to take her out of her comfort zone there. The crowd obviously is very much behind her. That'll be less so here, but will be again. I think everybody likes an underdog story, and the story that the announcers will talk about in this matchup is the Wimbledon finals, where Anisimova got zipped. A rough outcome, but still, good to make the finals. It's progress too. For pundits, they're looking at the final outcome. But for Anisimova, she's looking at the results this year, and she's doing better than she ever has, and she's constantly making progress. And backing it up in a subsequent major is huge. Even if it's your home major, even if it's the one where you're expected to do well, she's doing well, and she's getting there, fairly safely. So only dropped the 1 set to Jacqueline Christian. For me, I think this is going to be... You're not saying much if you say it's going to be closer than Wimbledon, But I think this will be closer. I think Anisimova wins 3 or 4 games each set here. She doesn't move the best, right? So if Swiatek is getting short balls, she's going to be able to clean things up. Anisimova can make one spectacular get to each side, basically. So if you drag her to the backhand wing, she's going to get it. The quality of the retrieve is not going to be enough to keep Swiatek from getting to net. Same thing on the other side. Anisimova, if you drag her wide to her forehand, tends to just go with the big side spin forehand. Tries to go down the line or cross court for a winner. Fine, she can hit it, but probably not for a whole match. That's a really hard shot to pull off. That's the highlight reel shot. You go for it on the big point or when you have your balance more than usual. So, tough spot for her on defense here. And I think that was the issue in Wimbledon also. Wimbledon, it's much harder to move though. So Anisimova is going to do better here. Also, timing the ball is a lot easier on hard court. So Anisimova is going to be able to return serve better. She's going to be able to hang better in the rallies. Swiatek hits with a lot of topspin, but not the hugest issue on hard court, So, it's not a giant problem on grass either. I just think, in the finals of Wimbledon, the baseline of the court is chewed to bits, and it's hard to time the ball. And Anisimova is a player who I think plays better. Like Sinner, the more exact the bounce is, the better she plays. And other points for Anisimova. This isn't all about Anisimova. I still think I do like Swiatek to win, just because it could be a long match, and I think it just hinges on Swiatek's first serve percentage. If she's serving well, she can win because every game where Anisimova's serving second, I think whichever set that is, I think she's going to be under a lot of pressure because she does go pretty big, and you can miss when you're doing that. You can miss by 2 inches, and it would have been a winner, but instead it's love 15. And then, Swiatek gets confident, sends a backhand down the line from the deuce serve. And Anisimova does like to kick that one wide. So suddenly it's love 30, the crowd's making noises, and Anisimova gets a little nervous in those spots. So going to be pressure here. Reverse pressure, I think, sometimes because you want to do better than you did. So there's some relief once you get a game on the board. I hope Anisimova uses that with the crowd. I hope she laughs. After the first game she wins, the crowd will give her something after that. And you want to get the crowd on your side, even if they're on your side. You want to get them active early in the match, especially because they can be, the New York crowd can be a bit rude. And, they won't be, is this a night match? No. They gave him the day session, which I think hurts Anisimova. Even though it's cooler at night and gives Swiatek a better chance to defend, I think the night crowd at the U.S. Open is significantly drunker than the 1 p.m. crowd. If you can get drunk, you can. Listen, it's hot outside. Day drinking is guaranteed to get you more drunk for non-scientific reasons. But I think the nighttime crowd is rowdy, and the daytime drunk crowd is trying to hide how drunk they are. So getting claustrophobic in the bathroom and wondering why they're sweating so much and how to stop. So different crowd, different energy. And I exited out of the thing. I wasn't trying to. So I'll go back and show, she crushed Alexandrova. Alexandrova's a very similar player at times to Anisimova. Laser-like ground strokes, very aggressive. Serves well, but not really a server per se. And Swiatek hit about 59% first serves, and that's good enough. Hard for Alexandrova to really defend there. Second serve, points won, 27%, and I think that's the issue for Anisimova too. Once Swiatek gets you in the rally, and she knows that you have some mobility issues, there's just really no reason for her to miss. It tends to play players into really good form when they're, aware that they can grind you down and, that you're going to force things, and for your side, you're aware of that too, because the other player just isn't missing balls. And even though as an observer, Anisimova is not in any danger, she kind of knows that she has to score in order to escape those rallies. So the choice is test whose stamina is better, which is not ideal, or, try to come up with something, which is tricky when the other player is moving you. Even top players, if you go into a match, any match that you're playing against somebody, and you just focus on hitting the next shot that makes them move to the next position, you'd be surprised how many solid players will just kind of unravel and start just retrieving and giving you control of the rallies. It just really does work. Slight caveat I'd say for minor leagues is, if a player is very fast, obviously the top pros aren't going to do this, but I think that the faster players tend to recover better to center court, so they don't do it as consistently. So sometimes you want to go behind the fast players, but they just they don't really focus on going back to the middle yet because they can cover that ground anyway. So one of the formulas that I've used in racket sports is just that. When I play someone who, when you play someone who doesn't move well, making them, what am I saying? Make the people who can't run. Very solid analysis. Anyway, 59% is good enough to win. Bright point for Anisimova is, the round before she served 43%. And, here it was the first set, I think, where she served very poorly. 37%, and then got it up to 52. And then kept it above 55 the next match. So Swiatek's getting used to the conditions. Should win this in 2 or 3. I just think it's a very solid and motivated Anisimova coming in here, and a lot of the things that gave her trouble her very first final, tricky conditions, and Swiatek in her best form are a problem. Obviously, Swiatek has won this tournament before, so she's going to be comfortable. She's going to have crowd support also because of that. It doesn't matter who you are if you're one of the top players in the world. And Swiatek's really nice too, so there's no reason the crowd is going to be against her. So I like Swiatek there. And make people who can't run. So very strange I haven't been hired as a coach yet when I know such things. So Osaka, probably played the match of, if you're not following tennis, I think she played the match of the tournament there, beating Goff so badly. 2 and 3 is not, I think, what people expected. There was a lot of hype around this match. I don't think the people hyping it up were watching the tournament. Goff has been in or near tears in a couple matches already. She's had the double fault issues this whole fortnight. She's had the forehand issues this whole tournament. She knows it's going to come. Is that making it come when she's in the court? I don't think so. It's a technique issue. And the fact is that Goff is really smart. She understands that she's making errors in these situations. And so she wants to win anyway, so she's willing to do what it takes, which means trying to guide the forehands in, and also alternatively trying to commit to the technique and swing full, which is when she does tend to, shank the ball a little bit and get frustrated, or put the ball into the net with a ton of spin and just kind of look at her box like what the F, which is a fair question to ask. They need to be working on her with this. I'm sure they are. I still have faith that she can fix it. Just very hard to fix things while on tour. So, but that really was the story. Listen, if you decelerate on the forehand, you can't play Osaka when she's playing this well. Osaka's playing solid tennis. She's serving very well. She's hitting the ball aggressively. These are fast courts. And, Osaka has won this tournament before and was a top player. So, the whole slump since she returned, you can discard it the moment she wins, really. That's how it kind of works with these players. The level is in there. It's an if that it comes back, but when it comes back, you kind of can just, expect it to stay for that week. So Osaka's playing really well. Not the best serve percentage, 42% is pretty bad. But Goff just kind of imploded. It looked like she got a bit fatigued. Just a bad day and a lot of pressure for her to win there, and knowing, it's almost like sporting an injury into a match. Your left leg is messed up, and then you go out there and every single issue that it gives you is just going to frustrate you more and more. I think Goff has some of the best poise and maturity on tour for all the young players, and I think that's the reason you don't see her just completely imploding out there while she goes through this. Any other player, I think, not any other, there's a lot of fortitude in pro sports, but some players might be more frustrated. So for Osaka, it's a great win. It's something she needs, to get the pressure off, to get people to stop asking her questions that aren't about tennis, and playing an opponent she's had some success against. I think some of these might be, let me just edit this and see how many. Yeah, so Osaka has won most of their hard court meetings. They just played at the Australian Open. That's early in Osaka's comeback. In terms of quality, she wasn't really playing that great yet this season. I would say Osaka really only hit her stride in this North American swing. But it's also early in Mukova's comeback, and I think, she had wrist surgery and, wasn't really that good until recently. I think that she's played some good tennis. She's played a good set and then played a bad set, and it felt like she was kind of... I'm trying to think of who the other player that did this was. They kind of just worked their way. Team. When Team first came back from wrist surgery... it's funny that there's parity there. When Team first came back from wrist surgery, it seemed like he wasn't really worried about winning or losing matches. He was just working on things and trying to ease back into it and see where he was at. And obviously with Team, his wrist never really fully recovered, and he wasn't able to continue playing, the level he wanted to. But I think Mukova's early results can kind of be tossed aside. What I saw last round was very solid. She was able to beat Kostyuk in 3, just by playing consistent tennis throughout. She has all the defensive skills that you need to kind of frustrate a player. It'll be interesting here to see if Osaka, deals with the slice well. She can sometimes get a bit too aggressive when she has time. Goff giving you the ball short in the court with not a lot of spin is going to let Osaka really drive the ball and flatten it out. Her shot bends a lot when she hits that off forehand. But I'd say that, the one place she does make unforced errors when she has time from behind the baseline. I'd say she kind of snatches at the ball a little bit sometimes and puts it into the net. So I think this will be close. Osaka should win just by having the big first serve. I think, the players that Mukova has beaten so far weren't really able to put her away at the end. Kirstea almost did it, but, at the end of that in the third set, couldn't land first serves, made a bunch of unforced errors. Noskova, same thing. She played a really good set, but just kind of didn't have the stamina to do it for the whole match. And then Kostyuk played very well. Not the hugest server, though. Kostyuk's doing most of her work from the baseline. And I would say that part of her getting to the third set was starting the second set really well. Mukova had a little bit of a letdown, and Kostyuk got really aggressive right away, which kind of didn't mirror what she did in the first set. So I think in the WTA, particularly because the serve isn't that dominant, the early break in the second set is very possible. And if you get after that and you're playing a different level, I think your opponent takes, a game or two to reset, especially if they won the first set with tactics that will no longer work. It takes that adjustment, that sort of, learning curve is there. So I think Mukova can take a set. I think Osaka should win the match. She is hitting the ball really well. She was able to navigate the Kasatkina problem. Kasatkina and Goff, I think combined, is what Mukova's game kind of looks like. There is good athleticism there. There is good power. A lot of defensive skills, not the hugest offense, but the offense is there. She really reminds me of Murray a bit, just beating you on overall quality tennis rather than exploiting one aspect of the game. So yeah, I don't see a way it doesn't go 3. It's hard for me to say Osaka can just blank Mukova, even though I thought, she might have trouble with Noskova. Osaka does still make some errors, 40% first serves. And again, the Goff win is great, right? It's a tremendous win. You can't take it away from her. She won the match. She's in the quarters. That's a great result. But I think Goff just helped a lot there. And I think, players following the tournament kind of knew that was a situation where she wasn't going to thrive. She wasn't going to play her best. So I think Osaka wins this in 3. Very close, though. And, Mukova is the one who's been kind of hinting at stealing a major here and there the past few, seasons before the wrist issue. She really was going deep consistently and playing some good matches against the top players, just not really getting over the finish line. So very generic for me to say that's going to happen again. I don't know the odds here. They gave something. They offered something like minus 250. I don't think it's that high, but it's not wrong. Also, not going to get into gambling too deep here at the end, but obviously people are betting on Osaka when she plays. The name recognition is huge in gambling, and especially since she's winning and she just beat Goff, you can expect a ton of investment on that side. Even if I tell you the match is 50-50, people are still going to bet on Osaka. If I tell you it's 50-50 and I tell you that's the exact odds of the event finishing, people are still going to bet twice as much money on Osaka. So you don't get a lot of information in these cases there. I'd say that price is inflated. By what percentage? Couldn't tell you. Or I could, because you can't argue with me. Because this is a podcast. Why not try an envelope today? Do people still use envelopes? I don't even know. Yeah, so I guess that's all the matches. I'll circle back with the semifinals tomorrow. Some good tennis so far today. Lehechka looked like he was having some trouble. I actually don't know if that one's over yet. But I'll check, because I have a telephone. Yeah, Alcaraz won in straight sets. Pegula won. Krejcikova looked a little bit fatigued in that. Pegula was able to really hit the forehand cross just to great effect the whole match. It felt like Krejcikova needed to sit on it just to kind of get the match even. And, kind of didn't. She went with her usual game, which is just going very offensive and looking to eventually find that level. And just wasn't able to find it today. So good win for Pegula. Sabalenka, Vondrousova, and Djokovic, Fritz are going to be really good, I think. So I'm going to probably go to sleep or go chase some squirrels, or I don't know what I'm going to do. But I'm going to stop talking.